One might even get the sensation that everybody is a climate change expert nowadays. But visions and ideas on climate change is one thing, and talking about actual implementation and practical solution is something completely else. It's an extremely complex topic which involves technology, politics, economics, environmental affairs. So I'm really happy that today we have an opportunity to discuss this topic, and maybe we can share with you the Bavarian experience on climate change and how to best design sustainable climate solutions. Before I introduce the panel, I would like to invite our opening speaker, who will not be Mr. Markus Ferber, unfortunately, but we're joined by Dr. Martin Huber, who is member of the Bavarian State Parliament, and he is chair of the Christian Social Union Working Group on Environmental Protection and Regional Development. Dr. Martin Huber is elected member of the Executive Committee of the CSU Parliamentary Group. He's also member of the Committee on the Environment and Consumer Protection of the Bavarian Parliament. And to sum up, Martin shared with me his vision that he wants to see Bavaria to become the world's most environmentally friendly business location. That's an inspiring ambition. Martin, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to say it's me really a great pleasure and an honor for me to be in Brussels at the Wilfried Martens Centers today. And you have chosen a very good date because it's the opening of the Bavarian Oktoberfest of the in Brussels of the Bavarian state embassy here in Brussels, and so it's a very good combination for me to be in Brussels at first at the Hanns Seidel Foundation, and then we are representing all our parliament. It's a second very important event today. We have something meaningful that unifies us all. We are all major Christian parties, and we must continue to remind ourselves that Christian values mean regarding climate policy and sustainability. Our foundation was laid down in the book of Genesis to say subjugate and rule over them, and it is a great responsibility we were entrusted with. We have to treat it with respect and appreciation. We are all major Christian parties. So who, if not us, should address the issues of environment and climate change? And of course, we must return to these values. Therefore, I do not understand that this issue, which is so closely intertwined with God's creation, is picked up by interest groups who say that they do not want to have anything to do with faith and church. But also, why are we so distressed about this issue? Others use polarizing and radicalizing rhetoric. For example, some say that every week they pillory a different target in society. Farmers, car drivers, homeowners in rural areas. Some say that all are bad. So I have wondered, how can we motivate people? Environment and climate protection are huge tasks. A task for society as a whole. Everyone has to partake, and everyone needs to get motivated. And I am convinced that we can only achieve success if climate protection is regarded as an issue of innovation. So, amongst other things, we need to finance more research. In Bavaria, we lead by example, link in the areas of clean tech, hydrogen, re-oil, and plastics. Just last week, our Minister President of Bavaria, Markus Ferber, gave a clear signal for clean tech and climate protection through innovation in his government policy statement. This government policy statement was another big step towards linking economy and environment in Bavaria. And that's what you said, precisely what my vision is. Bavaria must become the most environmentally friendly business location in the world. We view ecology and economy as closely linked rather than separate issues. And the announced initiatives show that our approach to link economy and ecology finds more and more acceptance. We are starting a super tech initiative in Bavaria. For that, clean tech is a quintessential building block. We are providing over 80 million euros for this purpose. And in comparison to other German federal states, Bavaria has the highest turnover with about 22 billion euros and 95,000 employees in the clean tech sector. We want to harness the potential of global trade with climate-friendly technologies for Bavarian companies. Bavaria should become a leading region for innovative climate protection. For that, we invest money, 2 billion euros in the next years. And clean technologies are Bavarian core competences. Synthetic fuels, cutting-edge battery research, and hydrogen as the fuel of the future. The research center in a rural area in Bavaria, for example, is slated to become a national reference center and will install a new power-to-liquid station. They are researching a substitute for kerosene-based jet fuels. Bavaria already invests in a statewide battery network consisting of Bad in Bayreuth, the TU in Munich, and the Fraunhofer Institute in Augsburg and Würzburg. Its goal is to develop a new generation of climate-friendly and more efficient batteries for e-mobility. The hydrogen strategy will be further encouraged and founded. 50 hydrogen filling stations are planned throughout Bavaria by 2023. And at home, in my district, a big company does research the area of rural, in short, turning plastics back into synthetic fuel. All of this shows that we have already accepted our mandate as a major Christian party for quite a while. We have to make clear the preservation of creation is originally a conservative issue. The European People Party does not need to be apprehensive of these issues. Quite the opposite. They are part of our roots. We don't base our approach on prohibition, but on innovation and technology. Together with the European populace, we want to shape and protect our future. So, my demand of politics is thus: combining individual responsibility and governmental action together with new technologies and innovation to make climate protection the goal of the future and as a subject for all the society. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Martin. Please join us. Maybe I didn't introduce myself. My name is Dimitar Lilkov. I'm a research officer at the Wilfried Martens Center. The Martens Center is the mastermind behind the Network event today. Thank you, Martin, for your opening speech. I'm really happy that for our panel, we're also joined by two additional distinguished guests. I'll start with Alexandra Kletzsch. She is founder and managing director of Compact 61. Alexandra has a degree in economics from Ingolstadt, and she came up with the idea for her company during the time she worked for a startup incubator in Nuremberg. Seeing the possibilities of e-commerce developing faster and faster, Alexandra realized that consumers face the risk of harming the environment as packaging waste is increasing and ever increasing because of growing consumption. Alexandra's company, Compact 61, specializes in producing sustainable packaging. And last but not least, we're joined by Dr. Matthias Wucherer, who is head of the network Blühende Landschaften. Matthias has a PhD in evolution and ecology. From 2014 to 2017, he was a study director for eco-toxicological risk assessment on plant protection products in pollinating insects, bees. Since 2018, Matthias has been head of Flowering Landscapes Network, MBL, a small NGO facilitating the development toward biodiversity-friendly cultural landscapes. Matthias used to be head of the Working Committee for Environmental Affairs of the CSU Youth Organization. Thank you for joining us. Alexandra, during Martin's opening speech, we heard the word innovation and technology a lot. Can you give us a couple of opening words, and how do you relate to these keywords yourself?
Sure. Thank you. I'm very happy that I was invited here today to talk about climate change because, as you already mentioned, pollution, environmental pollution was what has driven me to found my own company like 2 years ago, as I founded Compact. And since then, of course, climate change determined my personal life as well as my business. So our solution is sustainable packaging, which provides an alternative to classical styrofoam. So we developed a solution based on the natural fiber jute that displaces styrofoam everywhere where certain temperature limits has to be complied during the shipment process of 48 hours, for example. But instead of styrofoam, it is 100% biodegradable. And for those of you who may not know, styrofoam is a mineral oil-based product, which is barely recyclable. So therefore, we can say we truly provide a value here. Since our solution has, as I said, natural-based, but has at the same time the same functionalities as styrofoam, as it's insulating and shock absorbing. So you might argue that e-commerce sector is a very tiny branch considering climate change as a whole, but nevertheless, I think it's baby steps we are taking, but at least we are having an impact. And after all, I think this is what it's all about. There are small companies like us emerging on the market, which makes who make sustainability their business model at the core. But we also have like traditional companies who need to be incentivized to make sustainability like their priority, or at least consider it in their daily business. And I think this is the big question we have to ask ourselves: how can we combine like the innovation, which comes often from smaller companies emerge in the market, working together maybe with branch experts who have large expertise but don't know how to handle sustainability. And this is where I think you also have like some great advices. Yes, because at the end, like, the baseline was never as promising as it is today, because we have the support of scientists, we have an awareness in societies, as an example, Fridays for Future, which is only part of a societal movement, and we have the innovations, growing to the market. And therefore, what I want to say is that people were never as open-minded as they are today, and that we really have a chance to make an impact.
So much. Matthias, would you share your perspective?
Yeah, first of all, I'm also very happy to be here. I'm quite a bit of an alien here, as I'm an ecologist, or biologist it is. And I'm happy here to share the perspective of biodiversity and some other aspects which are all intertwined with climate change issues. And may I address one point you just mentioned? There is not the one thing, the one technology we have to work on climate change, but we have to work on all sides at the same time. So we should not argue, are we going to work against climate change, or should we address biodiversity? We should go for all these topics at once. And I'm very happy to be here, because especially conservative parties do have one problem at the time, and I'm still under the impression of the previous session here, the Zeitgeist session, which all said that there is this problem that conservative parties are working on, as you stated, also are working on environmental issues and topics, but the voter does not seem to realize that, and we have still this increase in green parties, and then you might wonder, why is that? To me, that's quite clear. I heard a lot of complaining about why the green parties attack the conservatives, and why they distribute fear among civilization and citizens. And the big problem is that these fears are justified, because they are backed. So they're also backed up by science, and so discrediting those fears and those who accuse so that nobody does anything really is not very productive, and the voter also shows it in his vote. The problem is that we question the science behind climate change and behind biodiversity and many other things. We question this science, and which is the same science we rely on when we use insecticides and all other stuff. So the problem is we lose some coherence here, and that's what the voters don't like. So what we have to do, or what all major parties have to do, is to not stay in the same ideology or same box, or in the comfort zone that they were used to in the last decades. But they have to really address all these issues, because at the moment we have the one problem that if you want to change something in environmental policy, you basically, it appears you have only one party to vote for. Yeah. Even though that's not true, but it looks that way. So all parties have to address environmental issues much more as a part of their own policy. So big parties are often very reluctant in addressing environmental issues. I give one example. We had this discussion within the party about power-to-gas systems. When I was involved in this discussion, it's some 12 years ago now, and still there's not really considerable research even on this matter. It comes now into political discussion, and 12 years is unacceptable for these transitions when we're talking about technology. And let me say one thing about biodiversity. I'm not sure if everybody is aware that biodiversity is the number one, the loss of biodiversity is the number one environmental issue on this planet. Number two is the nitrogen flooding of all ecosystems, and only number three is climate change. But everybody here in Brussels or in state parliaments is talking about climate change. Why is that? Can somebody explain me that? I'm very sure that the other topics will come up in the next years, and I would strongly advise all parties to be prepared for that and to act instead of reacting on these issues.
To follow up on that, I can only assume that climate change is branded for the Brussels public and for the overall public because it's overall term. It also includes biodiversity. Maybe this is where confusion stems from. But I just want to quickly ask you, can you go a bit deeper on the aspect of biodiversity? Why is this such a big problem, and how can we tackle this?
Yeah, the thing is that we have a lot of models on climate change, and we have predictions, and these predictions came into real life. So we can, I think the last 2 summers we all felt that. And the thing with biodiversity loss is that we don't really see it. And why is biodiversity so important? Because, as a scientist, I can tell you that all of nature is very much intertwined, and we have very complex systems, and we haven't even understood a tiny bit of it. And we already rely on everything. So biodiversity is a key in maintaining so-called ecosystem services. Thank you. This is a very slow system. When we have a loss of biodiversity, these ecosystem services will break down, but this will be slowly. But to build them up again will also be very slowly, and we rely on these services because they provide not only energy and clean air and drinking water and all sorts of stuff, but also degrading our waste products and so on. And in the middle of that is biodiversity. And of course, we have all these things of food chains and stable nutritional networks and so on. And also our food production heavily relies on biodiversity. And I want to stress that because we rely much more on biodiversity than only pollination by honeybees.
Thanks. Martin, Matthias mentioned something extremely important, that the center-right is perceived as if it's not doing enough on climate change. Are center-right parties making mistakes in their communication policies on this issue? Or is there something else involved? And maybe you can comment on the CSU. Have you seen any specific shift in the CSU in the last couple of months?
Well, I think we have members all over the last decades working on climate change. But as you mentioned, of course, it was a question of communication. And to be honest, of course, other issues like economy or foreign policy or security policy has been much more important in communication than environmental protection. But it is an issue of Christian social parties. It should be, and as I mentioned, it is our Aufgabe, no? Our task to say it's really combined with our roots. And as you mentioned, as the center-right parties have a problem in communication, it's always easier if you are a party with a single issue. So you can communicate in a completely different way. And as a people's party, it's always our task to say, okay, we have to protect the environment, but also we do not want a movement like in France with the yellow shirts. So we have to combine the social aspects, the economic aspects and the environmental aspects. And with such a balanced position, it's always harder for you to get the awareness in your position in the media than the single issue party.
Also, single issue parties, bearing in mind the Greens, maybe it was also easier for them because they were always in opposition. They were never actually in executive government to actually tackle these issues and put place specific reforms. Yep, please.
That's not entirely true. We have one state in Bavaria where we have a green-black coalition. It's Baden-Württemberg.
Okay.
And they really have, they're facing the same problem actually. They are in government now, and they also have plebiscites now going on because people claim that the government is not doing enough. So they also have the same problem when they are in charge.
And the Green Prime Minister is against this movement.
Yeah, he publicly was against this movement. So that's really, that's basically art to conclude as a Green. We want to protect the environment, and if there's a plebiscite coming on protecting the environment, they're against it. Exactly the same thing happened in Bavaria when the Prime Minister wanted to implement climate change into the Constitution. Thank you.
Grundgesetz.
The Grundgesetz. No, the Bavarian Constitution.
Constitution.
The Greens voted against it. So that's.
But now they are collecting signatures to get it in.
Alexandra, I love this dynamic because right now, from both sides, you know, the political angle is getting heated up. Question for you: you represent innovation, you represent small business, you represent an aspiring entrepreneur. Do you think that the decision makers, the policy makers, do they relate to the actual problems faced by small businesses and entrepreneurs when it comes to these policies?
I mean, we as small entrepreneurs cannot claim to be, well supported always, because I think policies don't even know sometimes the challenges we face as small businesses. And for instance, we are doing packaging, that's my business, my thing. And we often have the problem with the deposit system, as an example, because we develop sustainable solutions which are made for the organic waste bin, but on the packaging regulatory, we don't even have one. So there is one major problem we face. And additionally to that, we don't even have, on a regional basis, there are a lot of differences when it comes to deposit packaging waste, actually. And these are problems which determine our daily life as a business, as we need to face these challenges to move forward, to actually bring our solution on the market. But I think it would be unfair to say, okay, you need to know this. I wish that we will someday have more transparency on the market of packaging, on the market of how to handle waste and deposit it. But this is something I will give you now as an advice and hope that we will develop in this way in the future.
Matthias, how about your network? How do you see this dynamic developing? Do you have specific criticism to the policy making level?
Yes, definitely. Specific. Where do I begin? The things, so we operate as a network, so we're not a huge NGO, but we are connecting other NGOs and foundations and all groups that want to change something in the cultural landscape, basically. And we have a lot of problems because, like in Bavaria, tries to increase biodiversity in agriculture. Now we have the problem that there are limitations coming from the EU. So there's a lot and it's still not such a big issue that somebody is keen on cracking it. That's one main problem. In center-right parties, we are very much focused on, as you said, on foreign policies and on security, safety, and all this stuff. That's where people still, or voters still, see the most competence in these parties. But environmental issues have to be on the same level as safety. That's the thing. So the work you do should be at the same level as the safety, should be on the news basically all the time. And that's really a problem, because there are also, so we have a lot of new ideas, innovations coming up, and they are all absorbed and diminished by the system, basically on all levels. That's a major problem. We talked about innovations and startups, and I think we do need a lot of innovation and small ingenious ideas to fix all this. And center-right parties are often very much focused on economy, and I mean the existing common economy, the particular existing companies. And then when environmental issues come up, as you said, they try to put this all in a process and weigh it up against economy and environmental questions or issues. And that's a bit of the problem, because necessarily there have to be changes. So we have to focus on economy for sure, but not necessarily this economy. I might address the car industry. Everybody knows that there will be major changes in mobility, and this does not only include the transition from combustion engines to electromobility. There will be also a reduction in individual mobility towards public transportation, and this won't work with a growth-oriented car industry. It simply won't. So we have to. So of course we have to develop these companies, but we don't have to defend them by all means, because there are other solutions by startups coming up, and they will provide the solutions, not necessarily the existing ones.
Martin, how about your view on this? Does the CSU, does policymakers engage actively with stakeholders, with businesses, with small businesses?
With small businesses like Alexandra, well, I think it's a part of our initiative. I mentioned our Minister President said last week it's part of the clean tech initiative we have, and it's also a part of a program where we want to support smaller businesses. And in general, I think we have to keep in mind that facing the challenge of climate change is facing the challenge of a structural break from an economy based on coal and all that to an economy in the decarbonization. And it's, of course, it's a deep structural break. And a deep structural break is always combined with fears, with insecurity. And as a center-right party, as a people's party, we have to face these fears also. And so we have to combine, as Matthias said, innovation, and it's not our task to conserve the status quo. As you mentioned, the automotive industry. To be honest, I also think that they were too slow in facing the challenge of new models in mobility. But it's now our goal to say, okay, let's start the hydrogen strategy. Let's win back our advance in technology. And I think, as you mentioned, 25 years ago, we've been further in hydrogen, but it was not able to bring it in the market. And now we have enough pressure to say, okay, we will win back this advance in technology.
You mentioned restructuring the economy. I just want to elaborate a bit more on this. Restructuring the economy, the green transition, this always leads to specific worries that we might face job losses. We might face economic downturn. Alexandra, when I was reading your bio, the thing that really struck me, and I really like this, is that you saw that we have an upcoming problem because of consumer patterns, because people use packaging in an unsustainable way, and this gave you the idea to start your business. So there's a different angle to this, that tackling climate change and approaching it through innovation and entrepreneurship can also lead to new companies, new employment opportunities. Do you agree, and can you share their examples potentially?
I do absolutely agree, because in the end, as I said, it's a big chance, and it doesn't mean like job losses go along with climate change, not at all, because I think as we face the challenge together with young startup innovators, but also with grown-up companies who provide, a larger workforce, actually, we are able to make the best of it. And companies like I'm of course a networker in my area, so I know a lot of startups who actually had the same idea, like founding something out of seeing a problem and making sustainability their business model at first hand. And this is a very nice way to go. But I think what is needed so that we can still, keep up with the market, so that we exist like in the next 2 years and longer, to actually implement climate change as something that's successful in the end. We need, of course, the support on every side, on your side as well as the political side. We need not financial support, I don't mean that, but we need like the road that is shaped towards a greener economy, so that we can actually, address our end customers better, our companies who are not just seeing, packaging is a very price-sensitive area. So a lot of our customers tend to say, okay, sustainable, that must be higher priced, actually, so I don't want it. So I think what we need is like checking the chance of these developing feeling that there is a climate change.
Before I open the floor from questions from the audience, I just want to ask all of you a difficult question. How can we best engage with people, with voters, on the topic of climate change? How can we communicate? How can we engage them when we talk about biodiversity? How can we engage people when we talk that maybe individual patterns of usage have to be changed and adapted? How do we engage them if, say, they're a bit more conservative voters or people from a specific age group? It's an open question. Whoever wants to follow up on this, how to make this topic even more relevant for people?
You have to combine this topic with an optimistic view, with positive thinking. We are always talking about these topics with fear, and with panic. And panic and fear are bad advisors. And I think we should communicate this. The project of climate change is a project of renewable. It's a project for the whole society. It's a project where everybody can join. It's an optimistic project, and we have to change a bit the communication in that way.
To be more motivating in the end, and getting the feel of being able to collectively tackle climate change.
It's a big chance to combine economy and ecology with the clean tech initiatives I mentioned. All the things that sustainable development goals, to say that it's not always a question of growth. It's a question of combining economy and ecology. It's a new thinking, and it should be quite positive to be part of it.
Matthias?
I couldn't agree more. We have the problem that environmental issues always lead to reduction, to limiting oneself to something, and sometimes it's even reactionist, so looking backwards. Our operations as Flowering Landscapes Network is explicitly not to go back to a landscape like 50 or 100 years ago where everything was fine, but to develop it into the future, to give biodiversity a place in a landscape of the future. We have to stop worrying and limiting, and we have to start to build something that's, in my opinion, also crucial to our survival as an economy, because if we still focus on producing something, we won't win that race against China. That's for sure. What can we do? We have to be innovative, and that's where the small companies come in. And if we always worry about we could lose some 50,000 jobs here, and therefore we don't gain another 100,000 jobs in another sector, then we will be stuck sometime. And that's, I think, one crucial point where the US are a bit where they are in front of us, because they do that. There are job losses, but there are also job gains. And if the gains are higher than the losses, then we're on the right track.
Especially the issue of Alexandra is a big chance, also combined with the circular economy. It's not only replacing plastic, it's reusing plastic, it's reusing other materials. It's such a huge market and such innovative. It's huge.
May I give one picture?
Sure.
of climate change. Consider, I got this from a professor from a physicist actually. Imagine this world is a wooden house, and we all live in it in different rooms. And in every room, some 50 or 100 years ago, we started to have a gas stove, and we light it up, and then we cook on this gas stove. And now the whole wooden house caught fire. So, and what we are discussing at the moment is reducing the gas stove from 5 to 4 or from 4 to 3. We should start extinguishing the fire. We already feel the heat, and we should switch it off as fast as we can, and then we should start extinguishing. And that's a thing where we could communicate. If we had, for example, one project we are in is an agriculture which actually has negative emissions, which takes carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it in a solid, untoxic way in the ground, thereby increasing crops by 20% and producing energy for everybody, renewable energy. These are the kind of visions we need. We're building something, we're going into the future. And if we here combine ecology, meaning biodiversity and energy issue and climate change, all in one, then people will follow, and then we have a coherent system people will vote for.
Or combine it with hydrogen and make synthetic fuel out of it. It's also a circular economy.
If you have enough renewable energy, then anything is possible.
Do we have enough renewable energy as it is? Can we do more?
So there are estimations that we would. There's this one system which is called agrophotovoltaics. So you have photovoltaics on agricultural areas, and we still grow crops underneath it. And we would need, I got estimations for Germany, roughly 5% of the agricultural area with these solar energy panels, and we would be all set for Germany's energy demand. So we could this in a relatively short time if we only went that way.
Quick follow-up for Alexandra and Martin. Are renewables the main way towards green transition, or we need some focus on other energy resources as well and sources as well? How important are renewables, and is there a specific?
They are quite important, and as we mentioned about hydrogen, it just makes sense if you produce hydrogen out of renewable energies. It's not useful to get hydrogen out of oil or gas or something like that. This is one point. The other point is, I think, the circular economy, rebuilding plastic back to synthetic oil, and of course to reuse all the materials. And I think there is a big chance in that, and you can solve the problem that economic growth is always combined with a growing use of resources. So we have to divide it, economic growth and using resources.
Yeah, that's one of the main goals of the Commission, to decouple economic growth from growing CO2 emissions.
Always. So I think there's a well-known approach with this. Okay, at first place we have to banish resources when we don't need them. So we just keep it like that. Then we should reduce them or reuse them actually, and that's why circular economy is so important, and this is why we try to implement circular economy as our business model, as we take something out of the nature, make it as a packaging and give it back to the nature afterwards, because it's biodegradable. And I think circular economy is something which is always around, but not really taken care of at the moment, because we are rather, at a horizontal economy at this point of time. And if we are able to implement circular economy, I think we are a major step ahead, and as we are today.
Great.
But facing economy is also biodiversity. Just one example, I wonder that you didn't mention it. At least the honeybee in Germany is worth of 4 billion euros a year for the agricultural sector. So it's also combined with economic use, keeping biodiversity.
Thank you. Now I'm on my own field. Honeybees, it's a great value. And honeybee is a species we keep, so we have big data on it, or we have solid data. And we also know that in some so overall in cropping, a honeybee only makes 50% of the pollination. So you can double that by adding the wild bee and other pollinator biodiversity. And that's what I said, because it's so easy, it's so important to preserve biodiversity as such, instead of using this quick fix idea of we subsidize honeybee keepers and then we have all this fixed. We rely on this complex structure and these complex intertwinings of ecological systems we don't even understand, but we rely on it. And the only thing we can sustain that is by having diversity, diverse landscapes, diverse land use. It's not by having protected areas. We also have to go in the cultural landscape. That's what we mainly do. We have to develop everything so we have a broad spectrum of biodiversity, because only then will we have stable systems which directly impact in agriculture the pollination products.
And avoiding the domino effect.
Yes.
Yeah. Lots of angles on this topic. Lots of things to talk about. I would like to involve the audience in the... We have an eager speaker there. Just a second. May I please remind you, this is a Q&A session. Please raise your hands, introduce yourselves. If there would be comments, make them quick. If there's questions, either pose them to the whole panel or specifically to any of our speakers. The floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Tobias Richter. I'm getting a scholarship from Hanns-Seidel-Stiftung and I'm studying economics in Mannheim currently. You talked a lot about technology and opportunities, startup mentality. You already came to the point of like cyclic economy, but I would be interested if you take into account that maybe in some areas of economy, growth is not anymore the right answer, even if we restructure economy in automotive business or in other areas. So this question is to all of you. What do you think about degrowth, and do you combine only worries and concerns with that, or also opportunities, especially in the ecological way?
First question is about degrowth. Can we get a couple more hands so we can bundle questions? Tommaso?
Tommaso Virgili from the Martens Center. I have a comment more than a question. I think as long as we treat the issue of climate change as if we were talking about the earth, if it's flat or round, there is no way that center-right parties can win the ideological battle. Specifically for this reason, because there is an ideological component behind that. So there is no conclusive evidence right now of the anthropogenic impact of on climate change. I mean, there is anthropogenic impact, but it's impossible to determine at this moment which part is human-made, and specifically from emissions, and what is part instead of the natural changes on Earth. And this is not me saying that, but it's the UN panel, the IPCC. Why I think this is important, not to deny all the efforts towards sustainability, but because this is linked to a punitive mentality, whereby your suggestions that are towards the growth and towards combining economy with sustainability will not be welcomed, because the Greta Thunberg narrative is that we must be punished in our consumptions, in our habits, and therefore your arguments, I think, cannot go through as long as we are in this binary logic of deniers and extremists of climate change, let's say.
Excuse me, ma'am, there was a question behind. Afterwards, the floor is yours.
Yeah, maybe first a comment to that one as well, because I don't know if you know the figure, like the 97% of scientists say that climate change is man-made. It's not that climate change exists, but it is like from anthropogenic source, like, and that's also in the IPCC. So just sorry, I wanted to comment on that because I thought it was ridiculous. I'm Christian Lohmüller. I'm also a scholarship holder from the Hanns Seidel Foundation and study sustainable resource management at Technical University Munich. And I wanted to ask you if because I think it's always the narrative, either we go more into the ecological direction, or but then we fear to lose voters to right-wing parties such as AfD. Don't you think it would be more, do you think there's potential to catch those people that could potentially go to AfD by rather like explaining them why we do it and go with more optimism in more like emphasizing the opportunities we get from ecological innovations? Yeah.
Okay, the last one, lady in the second row.
Good day. My name is Angela Kedaite, and I work with Swedish Luleå University on green economic transition. But I based here in Brussels because I also have another jobs here. So, and I've been a few times to Bavaria, to Munich. I have some professional partners there, and I raised my hand because a colleague from Martens Center, he said that no news how much is climate change is anthropogenic. I think it's been some discussions, CPTT, you are right panel, but it's been much criticized, and recent data is that not even 70%, but recently the whole speed already of climate change is just anthropogenic. And that we have to do much more. There are new models of French, some institutes which came 2 weeks ago that even with Paris Agreement implementation will go to 4 degrees warming, and with no doing to 7 degrees, and for 2 degrees we have to do much more. So new data are coming and new approaches coming, but my question is to Bavarian representatives, because when I travel to Munich, I like a lot, and I know this initiative which been by Markus Ferber to include in Bavarian constitution a climate change article. But for me it's interesting, let's say, what is situation in Bavaria with, let's say, environmental protection, how much renewable share, what are most urgent, let's say, problems and so on, what are concrete, let's say, state initiatives to tackle climate change and to increase environmental protection. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we had 2 specific questions for Martin. There was also 2 questions in the beginning about degrowth and about the ideology behind climate change, and whether the picture should it be black and white when we talk about climate change. Do you want to reflect on some of these questions before we go to Martin in Bavaria?
Yes, I'd like to. For the degrowth question, I'm completely emotionless concerning this question, because we all know we live on this blue marble here, and it is limited. So there cannot be exponential growth. There cannot be. There is a limit to growth, as we know it or as we define it. So that's So there shouldn't be any discussion. The question is, what kind of growth do we want? So a growth in quality, or even a growth in decrease, maybe, if you want. So degrowth must be an issue, and that's one thing I said about center-right political parties. Ignoring the fact that degrowth will be the ultimate consequence, and pretending that there will always be growth, and only focusing as growth as the only milestone or the only numbers won't be successful anymore. And people don't believe that. And
can you say this in an election campaign, though? Can you advocate degrowth in an election campaign?
No.
How does this go?
That's the question with. I thought you said it. There is no winning with environmental issues for center-right parties. I would strongly disagree with that, because you pointed out in Christian-oriented parties, this is a core value. Preserving the environment is a core value. It should be. And the thing is, we should stop having this reluctant, defensive attitude towards environmental issues. We should build an own narrative. That's when the election comes in. At the moment, if people say environmental issues are my most important topic, then you have basically only one party to vote for. What we need in a living democracy is having several parties giving different answers on the same questions. So we need an own narrative, and then you can win these elections with these topics, and you will. We basically, at least in Germany, but also in the European election, we're seeing that we have this transition to green. Where does it come from? People want to go to these topics. This is a vote-deciding topic, so we will have to go for this. And yeah, so we have more political competition also on this field. And the AfD, I think it was your question about AfD in Germany, so the I might say far-right party. I wouldn't. So in my opinion, they don't play any role in ecological questions. I think it's not the most people that leave the center parties towards AfD because of their environmental policy. These are they are also one issue parties, and I would completely ignore them for this field of policies.
Okay. Alexandra, any thoughts on these issues?
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you on that point. Especially, I liked your saying about developing a narrative, to the voters, and this also goes along, I think, with what you said earlier to build up a positive storytelling around climate change, to actually make the best of it and motivate people to not only claim climate change is there and we need something to do about it, and then therefore only have one party to vote for, as you already mentioned. So I totally like the idea of the narrative.
Martin?
Yeah,
Bavarian
a lot of questions. So first of all, the question about the optimistic way of presenting climate change. I think if there is somebody presenting the challenge of climate change as a chance, that's we. The Green Party is once a week telling eating meat is bad, driving car is bad, living in the rural side and the house is bad, and every week they focus on other groups saying you are bad. And I don't think that this will motivate anybody. So we say it's a chance, it's a challenge. So we try to make it in an optimistic way, and we say it's of course it's facing the challenge of a structural break, but it's also a big chance, a perspective, building a new economy. And as you mentioned, it's not a question of the percentage of growth. The Club of Rome says since the 1970s that in the limited planet, it's not able to have unlimited growth. So, as you mentioned, it's a question of quality, and it's a question of, in Germany we have this nice word of Wertschöpfung, so adding value. And I think with this word there is a lot of fundamental things said, because it's combined with values and with the creation. And when we think 10 years ago, we had the situation with the big economic crisis that we had, that the growth had also to growth. So if I have growth this year in 2%, the growth should be in the next year 3% and then 4%. So it was a economic policy that the growth has to be growing also, and this will not function. So it's a question of quality, and if I separate economic development from using resources, I need circular economy and much more efficiency, so I can preserve our level of lifestyle, but I can combine it with much more of economic responsibility. And as you mentioned about the question if climate change is man-made or not. I am from rural side in Bavaria, close to the border of Austria, where it's a big center of industry, chemical industry, which is an area which needs a lot of energy. And one businessman said to me, let's take a look on the way how gas and oil and all the fossils are created. it's sometimes over 1,000, 10,000 of years, sometimes over 1,000,000 of years, where CO2 is fixed in the floor. It's a huge process over 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 of years, where CO2 is fixed in the floor, in the ground. And all of that we put out within 100 years. That this, of course, has to be an effect to the atmosphere, should be clear.
Follow up? Yeah, and also potential questions. Yeah, okay.
Just a quick follow-up in case I wasn't clear. I'm not denying the human impact on climate change. I'm saying that it's a combination of factors. Actually, the IPCC says that. I have in front of me one of the reports, for instance, analyzing all the climate changes in history, including this one. Some of these changes have been linked to human influences. This is what. So it's not a matter of denying the human impact, which is clear, but it's also considering this in a wider framework and not in an ideological one, actually, in a scientific one.
But what is the consequence to us? If we say, okay, we are not responsible for 100%, but for 80%, what is the consequence? We have to act.
Yes, of course.
Nevertheless.
But we don't focus, first of all, on one thing, which is emissions. Second of all, we can be more prone to adopt technological innovations such as capturing, as you were saying, carbon in the atmosphere. So we can adopt a wide range of measures that are compatible also with sustaining the economy, especially in those countries like China and India that for now are not complying with these requirements. So changing the narrative, I think, can change also first of all, the results of the center-right party. Sorry. The results for center-right parties, but also the measures that center-right parties and other parties can take on this matter.
Yeah, but very good point, because it was the question of some of the scholarships. It's not a question of either or for us. It's a question of as well. So it's not either or. We have to combine economic development, adding values, and environmental protection. It's not a question of either or.
I agree.
Okay. We have 3 more questions. Ivan?
Cheers, thanks. Ivan Delibosic, former colleague actually from Martens Center. I would like to challenge you on one aspect from 2 different angles, and that is the bubble perspective that we're having here. And I'll say it Eurocentric, though it might be German-centric or Bavarian-centric, as you wish. We're approaching a global phenomenon from a narrow angle of demographically declining, economically developed Europe. We're talking about a world of finite resources where we're having the rest of the world demographically growing and developing at the same time. We're providing solutions from our angle which are fine for us but might not be accepted elsewhere. And the fact of the matter, and I will quote IPCC as well, but from a different angle, we cannot do it on our own. I mean, we contribute 10% of all the emissions globally, and yet we're kind of not really stimulating something that could be acceptable for the rest of the world. So my question is, when we talk about hydrogen solutions, the IPCC actually suggests that direct air capture and carbon capture, storage, and reutilization might be necessary for us to keep globally with our demands. I'm not talking about Europe here. So what do we as Europeans plan to do in order to provide, I mean, one of the goals of the next commission is going to make our climate diplomacy working. Is there something we can do actually to propose practical solutions other than just imposing trade limitations to our partners? Or shall we just continue with business as usual and focus on what we do without really thinking about the rest of the world?
Okay. I saw 2 other hands on this side, and then... Yeah. Can you please introduce yourself? Yeah.
Thank you. Manuel Avramescu. I'm a representative in Brussels for the Romanian TSO, Transport System Operator of Gas in Romania. I have a strategic positioning question. Here in the so-called Western world, we are roughly 1 billion. There are 6.5 billion people in the rest of the world. And of course, climate change and sustainable development are both global efforts. They cannot be regional, local, even continental efforts. Anything less, I consider to be a failure. Still, from what we see now, the pressure is here in European Union, United States, in the Western world. And on the Western companies, Western citizens, and so on. We ignore 86% of the world in our measures. One practical example. We are closing now in the EU the coal power plants. They pollute too much, they issue too much CO2 and so on. And we have roughly a little bit over 300 coal power plants in European Union. In the same time, now China is building more than 300 coal power plants in countries like Turkey, Indonesia, Philippines, Egypt, and so on. Obviously, any effort we are doing by closing 1, 2, 3, 20, 50 coal power plants, it's reduced to zero by the new ones that are built. And my question is, do we keep this path, or are we willing to project an equal pressure, but globally? Us as European Union, because we are talking about the political parties and the political strategies here in the European Union. Because if we really want to reach our goal, and we don't want just to find a reason to move money from the left to the right, from one technology to another, from one solution to another, we need to do this. We need to approach it differently. Otherwise, it doesn't take long till people will understand that this is not the way. And when they make this click and they understand, they will go from doing a lot to doing nothing. We'll have this overreaction of the common citizens and the normal companies in European Union. This is my perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're raising one of the most difficult questions when we talk about climate change. I'm sure that whole departments in the UN and the European Commission can't sleep at night because they're faced with this question. Thank you for this one. Yeah, third question in the series.
Thank you. Adam Bartha from the Epicenter Network. Thank you for the great conversation so far. My question is regarding economic trade-offs. So it can certainly be a political goal to completely decarbonize our economy, but can we acknowledge that it has to be paid at the end of the day by someone? And the question is who that someone might be. And to your comment about degrowth and that not being almost a question in itself, I think degrowth is one of the fundamentally dangerous ideas. And imagine if our predecessors 50 years ago said that right now we have a pretty confident and comfortable lifestyle. We don't need further economic growth. Imagine the lost value that we would have had. And I fail to see how in a world with finite resources, we can't have unlimited economic growth. Just taking the example of an iPhone in my hand. 20 years ago, this was a phone, a pen, a radio, a GPS, and in terms of resources, material resources, we required so much more just to build this. But through economic development and innovation, we have managed to create that, and I fail to see how we wouldn't be able to do that in the next 20 years. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have time for one final round of questions, but let's address these ones for now. Who wants to start? Get him on it. No product placement.
The iPhone is an excellent example. The iPhone itself, or your somewhat branded smartphone, is an example of degrowth already, because you bought one product. As you said yourself, 20 years ago, you would have bought 5, 6, 7 products. And if one of them broke down, you would have bought a new one. So this concentration also already is a part of degrowth.
Economic growth, though, right?
With economic growth, yeah. That's what I think. That's what we agreed on qualitative growth. And so this is if you say the discussion of degrowth is dangerous in itself, do you know the example of the Easter Islands, where the Polynesians were there and they cut down all the trees until they extinct themselves? So, do we as a thinking society really want to go at the limit, at the very far end, until we realize we have to do something? Because this end is coming, we know that. I won't spread fear that it's coming in 10 years or 100 years even, but somewhere there are these limitations. So I would ask of an civilization to with this amount of science that we have, to see this coming up and reacting early. So there's also this publications, late lessons from early warnings that goes in the right direction. And I want to follow up on those two questions, which were basically on this one-sided measures. What should we do in Bavaria or in Germany or in Europe if we're only a part of a world market? That's nothing more than an excuse. I see this on all levels of politics. On a community level, it's the state of Bavaria, and of the state of Bavaria level, one complains about the Federal Republic of Germany, and there they complain about the European Union, and in the EU they complain about the world market. We're turning us around. We don't. That's not a way to find solutions. We really have to do something and not excuse or find reasons. So. We did gain wealth and quite a bit of economical power in the EU. If we compare ourselves to China or India, where billions of people live, with their carbon emissions, and compare them to ours, we're being dishonest, because some of their emissions are ours because they produce for us. So that's one thing. And the other thing is they only emit CO2 at this level for a very short period of time. We do this since over 100 years now. If we have the total emissions, then we have a completely different picture, and which gives us also some. We have to make something good for that, and we also have to think outside the box. We already talked, or I think in an earlier session, it was your session. There was the term of carbon border tax. Yeah. That's something we can use. We do have a big and strong economy, and people or other countries want to trade with us, and we can take into account how much emissions or how this was produced. And the other thing is we can take responsibility by giving credit to countries which are not so far developed. I think Romania is a very good example. You cannot tell the people in Romania, you cannot deny them development and say, okay, we are highly developed in the western part of Europe and you stay where you are. That won't work. But we can give them credit for their biodiversity, which they have far more than in this highly dense populated areas here. We can give them credit for every single ton of CO2 they don't emit. If we have a trading system which treats all equally, then this works. And we have to lead something somehow in this global affair, because we have the awareness and we have the economical power. We have the US; they also have the economical power, but the awareness is a bit of an issue there. So that's
in the White House.
Yeah, especially one office in the White House, and so it's it's Europe. We have to do something, and the recent history shows what Germany does is soon implemented in European policies, and what Europe does will be reflected in other parts of the world. India and China is already adopting willingly environmental friendly technology, which was invented and pushed here. So always I won't hear these excuses about world market anymore.
Okay. Alexandra?
Yes, actually, I also want to refer to the bubble theory, because I think we also have it, like looking at us as individuals, saying, okay, I'm too small to make an impact or something, I don't even start. So that's why I'm on the same view as you mentioned, that everybody who can make an impact, even if it's an individual, a company, a politician, he definitely should. And after all, climate change is a challenge we have to solve all together, and therefore everybody is asked to take the chance to do something.
Well, the question if 10% is a lot or not is also a question as a point of view, because cutting your 10% of your salary, I think you would say it's a lot. You wouldn't agree to that. So we cannot discuss about is 10% a lot or not. It's our part, and we can, of course, we are in the responsibility to act. And 197 states agreed to the Paris Treaty, and most of them have much more less carbon than Germany or the European states have. So it just will work if every state and every member will contribute. It's as you mentioned, it's just an argument of excusing, what the others do and what can I do. This is not the question. Of course, we have to face the global dimension, thinking about 600 million people in Africa who don't have electricity and they all want. So, of course, it's important to look that this electricity in Africa is not carbon-based, but it's with our modern technology based, like photovoltaic, like wind and all that. Because, of course, you are right. If we do not help other states, they will find the path with carbon-based technologies, and this would be terrible. But they will try to develop their economies, and it's our issue and our task to help them that they can make it in a modern way, because otherwise it will not work.
Just to briefly add, the 10% Martin reference, it was also mentioned a couple of times. I think you referred to 10% that Europe, the European Union, contributes with a bit less than 10% of the global level of CO2 emissions, just to add it for our audience so that we can be clear. We have time for...
Everybody would say cutting 10% of my salary is a lot.
Fair enough. So we have time for two quick questions.
What was the question about 10%? A lot or not?
Two more questions. We had one from MEP Kanev, and second one, if there would be a final question before we wrap up. Second question. Okay, so.
Thank you. So my name is Radan Kanev. I'm a member of European Parliament coming from Bulgaria. First of all, I would like to share my deep approval of this Christian conservative idea on combating climate change. I would rather say a human-centered idea, because as Christians, as conservatives, our goal obviously is to save humans from an ongoing crisis, rather not saving the planet. The planet is the home. We care for the inhabitants of the home, of course. And then to ask a specific question about a specific danger I see, a very serious risk I see, whether you see it and how would you tackle with it. You said Bavaria is most probably the friendliest place in Europe for eco-friendly business. I would rather agree. If we search for for a second, or maybe pretending for the first place, maybe it would be somewhere in Denmark or the Netherlands. I see a really high risk of deep division between rather wealthy and eco-friendly societies, regions within Europe, and more losing momentum, rust belts of the continent, such as Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, East Germany, quite as well. Because obviously the better off parts of the continent are doing quite better in combating climate change and keeping economy at the same time.
Great question on the West-East divide when we talk about climate change. And the final question.
Thank you very much. My name is Ludo van Ooyen. I live here in Brussels, but I'm from the Netherlands. First, a small remark concerning the question, if you're too small to make a difference, you never slept with a mosquito in your room. Now, my question is the following. I'm from the Netherlands, and we have a very large part of our economy based on a agricultural system which is rather negative in terms of resources and environmental damage. For instance, we have many more pigs living in the Netherlands than people. When you travel in my country, you never meet a pig. So this is one problem, you know, taking care of the animals in a proper way. But we need to import their food, which is soya, which is grown elsewhere. Now, in the past 2 years, very important scientific studies have proved that our consumption of consumption pattern in the Netherlands, not only in the Netherlands, especially consumption of meat, is very inefficient, and it's very damaging. My question is the following: what are your opinions about this question, which is a very difficult one because it has to do with our culture?
Just to sum it up, the impact of agriculture and methane levels in the environment, correct? The dangers of environment, okay. 1 minute for each, if you want to refer these questions, and of course, closing thoughts. Martin, let's start with you. West-East divide, agriculture, lots of things to talk about.
Agriculture, I think it has been the wish of societies for a long time to get cheap food and enough food. And this was the frame for the agriculture. And now it's changing. And it's a big issue to change the frame in that way that the farmers can survive. But we have, the society has to keep in mind that changing the frame means getting less food and perhaps better, but even more expensive. But of course, you're right. It's I think one important point is for me that it's not the farmers are not guilty, as they mentioned in some times in the public opinion. They just worked within the frame society and politics gave them. And now we have the wish, several groups in the society, politics, to change the frame. But we have to change the frame together with the farmers and not against. Alexandra?
I think so too, because at the end, consumer behavior is always the center of everything we do, everything we determines in which direction we develop. I'm sorry if I refer to packaging again, but in the 1950s, like the supermarkets emerged. So there was first the need for plastic-based packaging because consumer wanted it. They wanted to buy it like everywhere. They wanted to be they wanted their food to be safe protected. So at this point, when consumers really want an animal-friendly and ecologically friendly agriculture, they need to ask themselves if they are willing to accept higher prices, for example. I think so the consumers ask also, besides policy or organizations, to change their mindset.
The statement that meat consumption is inefficient is not really exactly breaking news. So everybody knows that basically, and I wonder if we should really discuss this in an age of increasing obesity and all. Of course, it's part of our culture to have meat. That it's especially in Europe. That's a result of World War II, and the upfollowing generations didn't want to. So they wanted to have their meat because they didn't have it during and after the war. So. But there has to be some cultural change. There has to be. and it's also already coming. Now we can take this to extreme level and say everybody has to be vegan, and we have veggie days and all sorts of stuff, but that's not so liberal as we would like to have it. But some reduction will be there and has to be there. So we have to shift. That's the same growth issue, basically. We have to shift to more quality products. And as I said, there has to be some change on this. And this is true both for climate change and inefficiency of meat production in terms of climate, as well as in agriculture and land use. And for the land use issue, I totally agree with you. The narrative for farmers was for decades, they have to produce food. So in a century ago, they had to produce food for the soldiers and for the people. Now in the last decades, they had to produce food for the people in the state and for the world market, and to feed a growing world population. And now we are reaching a momentum where we cannot win, and a high-priced European agriculture cannot feed the world. So we have to say goodbye to these thoughts. But still, we need agriculture. We just have to change the narrative. Why do we want agriculture? What we want from agriculture is to take care of these 50% of the landscape they use and provide a habitat for biodiversity, and to provide high quality regional or local groceries. That's the main focus, not the quantity, but the quality and the landscape use and landscape shaping that is attached to it. And that's basically also a service that that agriculture provides to the public. And this exchange has to be strengthened more. And as I said earlier, agriculture has also the potential to be the best fighter against climate change. Because agriculture, on all scales, from Bavaria to Europe to global aspects, has the biggest land use and has the biggest surface which interacts with the atmosphere. So agriculture can pull carbon in huge amounts, and we should proceed this, because then in a certificate trade system, there's a new income possibility for agriculture which would exactly actually solve this problem, and then we are back to innovations and thinking outside the box.
Very briefly, I'll provoke you to answer the East-West divide question. Somebody needs to pick on this one.
This question is also a question of keeping the balance, combining economy and environmental protection. And if there are some countries like Germany who can do more with more innovation, they should do it. But it's also important to keep the balance within the European Union between West and East.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're 5 minutes overdue. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for being such a lively audience. We've had a great panel, so let's hear it up. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Alexandra. I really enjoyed the conversation.